Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Perry, to Gar Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Suzanne! Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Bravo time! He got it! Suzanne! Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less. This is a podcast about the NBA and the Phoenix Suns. My name is Max McCauley, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. His name is David Ash. David, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. No podcast boy today, Max.
Oh, I forgot to throw out podcast boy. Usually we do this a little later in the evening. It's like 11 a.m. here right now. I'm not on my game yet.
Yeah, it is very nice and early where I am. So
What time is it there right now?
It is 5:10 a.m. and I've got a flight to catch in a couple of hours. So no one can accuse me of not taking time to try and get these pods out.
No, yeah, we're trying to squeeze them out, especially since we were gone for whatever it was, 2 weeks, and also because we don't have a whole lot of Suns left, David. The season's winding down here, so we're gonna focus a little bit on the Suns and the news and in the last 9 games, but. You go ahead and jump in before I explain the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, I'm always keen to talk about the Suns if I can try and fit them in. And as you said, we're going to do a bit of an episode on the rest of the season, which is pretty short, what's coming up for the rest of the season now. And maybe lead into the off-season a little bit, which will be focused on, obviously, as the games dry up for the Suns.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about what we're doing, David. I think I've never heard anybody do it before. I think it's going to be fun and people will enjoy it. We're going to give our favorite first-round playoff matchups, but only really as a structure for going through each of the playoff teams and just going through the entire rosters. You and I have already done this, so people don't have to listen to us do it. But identify who could possibly be free agents for the Suns that maybe we're overlooking. We'll talk about the ones that everyone talks about, but really with a focus on who are guys that no one's talking about who we think may actually be fits on the Suns next year?
Yeah, and it was a really interesting exercise to go through. I'm sure we'll get into it soon. But, even just thinking about how some teams are going to go in the playoffs and how it might affect, whether they decide to bring certain guys back. There's a couple of teams definitely on my list who are almost on their last chance, I think, with the kind of their core, and bad results in the playoffs may result in a couple of guys being available for the Suns. So, yeah, I agree. We always try and come up with unique ideas for the pod, and I definitely think we've come up with them today. But a bit of news for the Suns before we jump into that, I think, Max.
Yeah, we'll do the news. How about you do a little recap before we get into that even?
Good idea. So since we last recorded, there was that wild win over the Pelicans, 138 to 136.
God.
The loss to the Bulls, 101-116, and the loss to the Pistons, 98-118. There's probably also a game versus the Kings, which is happening later today when I'll be on a flight, Max, and that'll probably already have happened by the time this episode's out and people are listening to it. So that means the record will either be 17-57, or if we happen to beat the Kings, it'll be 18-56. But either way, we'll be last in the division, last in the conference, and second last in the league, Max. But I won't get into the tank race because we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit later before we jump into this playoff exercise, I think. Plus, as we mentioned, there was lots of news this week, Max.
Yeah, we kind of got lucky with that. We were planning this podcast out on Tuesday, and damn, we don't really have any news or anything new to talk about, and then everything happened all at once.
Yep, very quickly we had the GM search rumor, and then Oubre's news, unfortunately, and then the Jimmer signing. So we should probably just jump straight into those now.
Yeah, I apologize that we're not talking about Jimmer's 40-point game against the Kings. It hasn't happened yet, so we can't break it down. But so here's the thing about Jimmer. I've had a lot of fun with this story, David, on Twitter. To me, it's just it's kind of an insignificant thing. It just is what it is. They brought him in. He's a big name. People freaked out oh, the Suns are doing super shit. It's so insignificant to me, David. He's gonna play for 9 games, and then that's about it.
Yeah, it's a really weird one, and definitely one which isn't worth spending too much time thinking about. We're going to, spend a little bit of time talking about it and what might play out and what it means for the rest of the team. But One that you can't take too seriously, I don't think. And when there's this little games left in the season and guys are dropping like flies on the injury front, it's kind of one you've just got to laugh off a little bit, I think, as you said.
So here's the one thing I'll say in favor of, not even the signing, but in favor of maybe Jimmer being better than he was before.
Yep.
And that's that, the last time he played in the NBA was the 2015-16 season, I believe. Mm-hmm. And even in that span of time, from then until now, the league has changed a lot. One of the reasons Jimmer struggled is because he couldn't get his shot off. He was actually a really good shooter. Like, obviously, he's just a great shooter. He was 40% even in the NBA.
Yeah.
But he didn't get very many attempts off, and I think in this new pace and space era, it will be easier for him to do that.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how he goes. I'll have a little bit on Jimmer later for our Did You Know segment, which is a bit of a clue for you and our listeners coming up. But yeah, in terms of how he's going to go on the court, he's 30 years old now and should know his game quite well. Obviously, coming from China, it's going to be a lot different to that. But it'll be interesting to see how the Suns kind of deploy him. It sounded like Igor was a little hesitant to give him too many minutes too soon. But, that kind of probably brings me to my question here, Max, and you alluded to it a little bit before. But how many minutes do you think we can realistically, see Jimmer getting for the rest of the season?
I think tonight he'll probably play very few, 10-ish,
Yep.
but I think it's going to ramp up. I think he's going to be a 25-minute-ish guy.
I don't have any qualms with that, really, with how little there are in kind of NBA rotation guys on the roster right now that's healthy. He's just a kind of another healthy body. And, probably my point there would be I would hope that he's taking a lot of Crawford's minutes and not leaning into Melton and hopefully Tyler Johnson minutes too. He was upgraded to questionable for the Kings game. It'll be interesting to see whether he has played that one by the time people are listening to this. But I kind of want to see 5 or 6 more Tyler Johnson games. So hopefully the Jimmer signing doesn't mean a total end to Tyler being ruled out, which hasn't happened yet, so I'm still a little hopeful, Max.
Yeah, me too. When the news broke, I really thought that meant it was the end of Tyler Johnson.
Yeah.
It just kind of felt that way, but I don't think that is the case because, their listener is questionable. It does sound like he'll play again. I do think there's a decent chance now that Jamal Crawford will get shut down for the season, which, obviously that'd be worthy of celebration. And also, I think this means that we're not going to see a Kobo at all for the rest of the season. I think they're just deciding he's not ready.
Yeah.
And even Melton, I think. So, do we want to get into the Booker Melton thing at all?
We can touch on it. I think you probably made some sensible points on it, so it's definitely worth touching on, Max.
In the Detroit game, if people don't know what we're talking about, Dwayne Rankin, Suns beat writer, reported that. I don't remember the exact words. Booker said something like, "Hey, Igor, take his ass out of the game. Put Ellie in," something like that, because Melton had stepped out of bounds twice.
Yeah.
on catch and shoot threes, which you can't do that. But here's the thing: these guys are all kids. They're in a competitive basketball game. They get heated. They yell at each other. Anybody who's played sports competitively at any level, even intramurals, knows that tempers can flare sometimes. Mm-hmm. When Booker was interviewed after the game, it sounded like it was not a big deal. They were laughing it off. It just really isn't. People should not make too much of guys getting mad at each other during the games.
Yeah, I think we're just kind of conditioned to it as Suns fans of over dramatizing some things like this on the court and reading a little too much into things. I think, as you said, these guys are competitive beasts and emotions kind of flare up during the game. And as Booker said after the game, PJ Tucker used to do it all the time, and it used to piss a young Booker off even then when a vet was doing it. So yeah, not too much to read into that. But just on Booker, the Jimmer stuff, you wouldn't think that it's too tied to Booker, but I've kind of got some priorities for the rest of the season, what I want to see and what I don't want to see. And I definitely, even though it would be going into the off-season, I don't want to see another Booker injury. Like, I would just love to see him go into the off-season as this healthy Booker that we've seen in the last 10 or so games, Max, and be able to build upon that in the off-season rather than, starting from scratch again and trying to get over an injury before then building on his fitness base for the next season. So Jimmer coming in, it takes some of that workload off Booker, I think. It takes some of the spotlight off him. And, I just don't want to see those crazy minutes and crazy usages from Booker down the stretch. And as long as he's there and being used, Igor's going to use him. I think we've seen that a lot this year. Igor doesn't shy away from playing in 40 minutes a game to try and win games. So, if having Jimmer and him playing 25 minutes a game, as you said, means, a little less stress on Booker, then I'm quite happy with that. And probably my other priority there is Ayton. A lot of our listeners said, threw the question out during the week, they'd love to see that 2020 game from Ayton, and a game where they surround Ayton with, more shooters. And as you said, Jimmer's always been a good shooter. There's no problem with that. And it'd be great to see Ayton kind of surrounded by Booker, Jimmer, Bridges, maybe Dragon if his shot's going down, and kind of see a game where they just run everything through Ayton and 4 shooters max.
That'll probably happen at some point because the Suns have a lot of games left against teams that aren't going to be trying very hard.
Yeah.
And so I can see Ayton really beasting on a team like that at some point. But I do want to go build off your Booker point because I just totally agree with it. The biggest disaster for me that this team could basically suffer would be Booker having an injury that would affect him in this offseason.
Yeah.
It's a really important offseason for him. He needs to really get stronger, really build his body up. What I'll be looking for the most before the season starts next season, in training camp preseason, is what does Devin Booker's body look like?
Yeah.
I want him to just look like the most shredded, ridiculous beast ever. That's how I'll know Booker realized what went wrong this season, and that'll prevent him from having these little knick-knack injuries that have just been the biggest pain. But speaking of injuries, David, unfortunately we have to talk about really just the biggest gut punch of the season for me. It's the Kelly Oubre thing, man. I think there's no secret that you and I both absolutely love Kelly Oubre.
Yep.
We both think that his impact on this team has far exceeded his numbers. Mm-hmm. We both really want him to be a Sun again, and the thought that it's even possible he could have already played his last game as a Phoenix Sun is it's sad, David.
It's not something I want to think about, Max. I'm hoping that they're going to bring him up. I'll throw it out to you early here. Do you think we can read anything into it in terms of them bringing him back and maybe having the structure of a deal that he's kind of comfortable or his agent's kind of comfortable in place? A thumb strain, I note that, he did have surgery, so it's no just innocuous injury that they've shut him down for the season for. But, you would think that a thumb, you might be able to play out the last 10 games of the season and then deal with surgery in the off-season. So can we read anything into that at all, Max, around how the team and player are thinking about each other into the off-season?
I think it's interesting. I would like to speak with somebody who knows more about this kind of injury.
Yeah.
Maybe like a doctor would be good. But yeah, if that's the case, if this is kind of more the elective surgery, because sometimes that could be the case, right? Sometimes you can not get the surgery or delay the surgery or whatever, even if it's inevitable you need it.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then I think it's an incredibly good sign that the Suns and Oubre already know where they're going with it, because if it's elective surgery, there's no way Oubre is doing it with his restricted free agency coming up. You just can't.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm taking the half glass full approach there, and as I always try and do, and hoping that there might be something there. Because, yeah, I think, as you say, we always see in the off-season a bunch of guys go into surgery for things that they were carrying throughout the season. Obviously, the Suns don't have a lot to play for, so getting that surgery done earlier is definitely better. We saw that in Booker's case with the hand injury that took him out for training camp. If he was able to get that done a little sooner, it would have been great. But yeah, with Oubre's upcoming free agency, I can't imagine he would have loved shutting it down early. Maybe feels like he's done enough to, hold his value in the market and with the Suns. But, it ends his stint with the Suns at 40 games and 12 starts, Max, and 16.9 points per game on 45.3% shooting and 32.5 from 3. As you said, kind of did it all for us. 4.9 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.4 steals, and 1 block per game. So, as you said, we're both very keen on bringing him back, and I just think the Suns need to bring him back. And I did some stuff last week, both on what his contract might look like, and we'll be doing more episodes on that in the future. I think probably I wouldn't be surprised if we end up doing a whole one dedicated to Oubre and why you need to bring him back and how that might look in the off-season, Max.
I'm game for that. I'll also point out that his March stats were 21 a game, 6 rebounds a game, 2 assists a game, 57.5 true shooting. That's really good stuff. That's secondary scorer ability stuff.
Yeah.
Second best scorer in your team stuff. And one more thing I wanted to touch on the Oubre thing for sort of a sign that it may have been elective, a good sign, is it wasn't like an immediate, oh man, this guy's out sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
He was out for one game, the Bulls game, and it kind of came out, and then it lingered a little longer, then they announced that he was taking the surgery. Almost like it was like they had a conversation about it, the Suns and him, and decided, it's not worth it, we're going to bring you back anyway. Just get the surgery sort of thing. That would lend credence to that theory.
Yeah, it certainly seemed that way. That was my kind of thought. But is Mikal Bridges probably the biggest plus here? He looks like the only healthy wing on the roster right now. Lots of people have complained about him not starting or not getting enough minutes. It's pretty much impossible for him to not do both now, right, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went to the Pistons game the other night, and Mikal Bridges, for parts of that game, was just ridiculous. He really stands out in person as he's kind of a physical force just because of his arms. He is really a problem, man. And I think, it's almost, it's interesting because I think he's kind of getting overrated in some elements and underrated in others. And I think we made this point before, but he's just really underrated as a scorer right now. And he needs to just really exercise that over these last 9 games since he has the opportunity to do so. I want to see him for times kind of not run the offense probably because he can't bring the ball up or anything like that, but I'd like to see him be with Booker sort of running the offense as a secondary guy.
He had another 7 assists against Detroit, Max, and he's kind of making a bit of a habit of that. And
yeah.
I'm really liking what I'm seeing from Igor in terms of putting him in situations to get those assists because he really seems to trust him now as a decision maker. I highlighted the 7 assists on our 7 plays on Twitter, and there was some flashy passes in there, but there was probably 2 or 3 were just very standard assists to mostly to Ayton, but a couple were on entry passes and things which we've seen the Suns really struggle with in the past. So Igor's putting the ball in his hands because they trust him. And then he's doing things off the dribble and stuff that we didn't see earlier in the year. And, at this stage of the season, you're really looking for reasons to watch these games, Max. That a couple of them are probably bound to be pretty ugly. But as you said, Mikal is definitely one reason. A lot of our listeners mentioned, it'd be great to see him have a 20-point game or something, a bit of a breakout that kind of shows going into next year what they can expect from Mikal as more of an offensive threat. And, he's doing stuff off the catch. He nearly put Andre Drummond on a poster, which just, I nearly jumped out of my seat when I was watching the game at work because that was just something we have not seen at all from Mikal attacking like that at the basket. So, yeah, really encouraging signs from him, and the injuries do mean that things really open up for him, and he'll be one major reason that I'm watching these last 8 to 9 games because what he does on the court is great, and he's really building a chemistry. I think all those assists that I highlighted, it was kind of Booker, Melton, and Ayton in all 7 of them kind of moving the ball around each other, and that's kind of what you want to see going into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of just thought of this while you were speaking about Mikal. The other thing this kind of does is make it less awkward for TJ to return at some point, doesn't it? It was going to be really hard to fit him back into what the Suns were doing because everything was going so great.
Yep.
It would have to cover the expense of Oubre to an extent. But now that Oubre is out, TJ can really kind of just come back in and get his 5 threes up for his bonus, as we like to talk about. But yeah, I think it would be more likely he would have been shut down if this Oubre thing didn't happen. David, let's move on to the tank race really quickly. I was just looking at the standings. One thing that jumped out to me, Cleveland is now 2 games ahead of Phoenix. Did you see that?
Yes.
That's interesting. I kind of assumed we were going to finish ahead of Cleveland with the way things were going. Mm-hmm. But now that we're just so barren, I'm not sure the Suns are going to win 2 more games. They might win 2 more games, but you got to think Cleveland wins at least 1 more. Phoenix might be kind of in the driver's seat for the second worst record. Yeah,
it's certainly shaping out that way. I think, we've noted before the home stretch for the Suns is looking pretty weak in a lot of the games that we're playing are against these tanking teams. So there's going to be some really ugly ones where each coaching staff or maybe front office has made some moves before the game to try and lose it. But Phoenix, looking at it more and more, they're pretty much guaranteed to finish in that bottom 4 now, even if they kind of won every game out from here, which that loss to Chicago really solidified that. which means they're guaranteed for a 12.5% chance at number one. But as you said, way more likely it's going to be that top billing of 14%, which pick 1, 2, and 3 slots all get that 14%.
Yeah, I would say even more than likely. It's almost virtually happening because Chicago's 4 games ahead of Phoenix now. They're not going to make that up.
Yep, and I would have happily, tried to win every game down the stretch, but these injuries and things have pretty much meant that there's an added bonus to, losing these games going forward. I definitely didn't want to lose games. I thought that the Suns could still build on things, and they still can build on things. It'd just be with different guys and the young core going into the offseason. So wins aren't bad right now, but for every loss kind of solidifies us not slipping back, because I think, we should explain in the new draft odds, they're going to lotto the top 4 picks now, so can kind of mean if you're in that 1 slot, you can slide back to 5 at worst, and then the 2 slot you can slide back to 6, and 3 slots slide back to 7, and so on and so forth. So it does, even though the odds for number 1 and Zion, which we keep talking about, don't change in 1, 2, and 3 with the 14%, there is an added bonus by finishing as high or low as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Although, and no, that is a very true point. I think in this draft, it's less important just because from 4 to 8 is the same damn thing. Maybe not 4 to 8, maybe 5 to 8, because as I told you last night, I'm in love with Jarrett Culver now. So I think I have a pretty clear top 4 for me ahead of everybody else. But I think if you listen to what people have been saying about this draft, not just in draft Twitter and stuff, but also NBA people, what I've heard, people like Sam Vecini, Kevin O'Connor who talk to those people, everyone seems to think it's an eye of the beholder draft to the extreme.
Yeah,
it's like once you get past Zion, John Morant, and RJ Barrett, it's just they're going to be wildly varying opinions on these guys.
Big time, and I think I've seen a few people make this point, even though with that being the case, the higher the pick, the more value it's going to have in trades and more chances to move around in the draft. So That's probably the more important thing rather than targeting a specific player. But I'll throw a couple of questions out here, Max. You alluded to one just before, but what would be your favorite non-Phoenix landing spot for Zion Williamson?
My favorite non-Phoenix, so that's tough. There's a bunch that I like a lot, but I think it's New Orleans, just because it would be such an emotional shift for those fans.
It really would.
It'd be nuts. And also, think of all of a sudden they'd have so much leverage if they had him, because they'd have this really solid thing. They wouldn't be so worried about their team turning into a disaster, and they could really, I kind of feel pick and choose their deal a little bit more.
Yep, and I think I might know who you might mention here. I think you alluded to him before, but who's your favorite non-Ja Morant March Madness riser, Max?
It's definitely Jarrett Culver. And also, you can include Ja Morant if you want. It's still Jarrett Culver. Man, I don't know if you got a chance to watch the highlights from the game yet, David, that he played.
I did, Max. Yeah.
What'd you think?
He's just smooth.
Yes.
That would probably be the easiest way to explain him. You kind of put him on my radar and mentioned that you thought he'd be the kind of guy that I'd like watching, and you were spot on, because I just love watching those fluid guys make the right plays, really smart with the ball, and just smooth. If I had to put it down to one word, it's very easy with him.
Yeah, he reminds me of kind of an old school star. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He has those finger roll finishes. He can just do things. He's not very athletic, but he makes up for it. But just so much craft. I love him. I think he's going to be really awesome. And if the Suns end up with him, I will not be disappointed.
Not overly flashy from what I've seen, but just kind of gets the job done, and all of a sudden he's kind of filled the box score, and you're spot on. That's the kind of guy that I love to watch, Max.
Well, I think I've talked enough basketball with you now that I get your takes, David.
You know my type.
Yeah, I know your type. Okay, last thing before we move to Did You Know, David. There was a report from Mark Stein on the Suns GM search. Apparently, they've reached out to Kevin McHale and Jim Paxson. Both of those are probably the bottom 2 names you could possibly come up with.
Yeah.
And my take on it is so some people were saying, oh, maybe this is just a favor to agents or whatever. And my take on it is the reputation of your organization. You know where you are right now. Even if it's not true and it's just a favor, maybe make a different favor at this point.
Yeah, there's not too much to touch on there, as you said. I would just say I kind of made these points on Twitter, but anyone who's not on there or didn't see them, it kind of just said that they'd spoken to McHale and were interested in Paxson. So you just never know with these reports. And as you said, the Suns should be in a position where they're doing their best not for those things to not leak at the moment, because it's just a bad look. But it kind of puts James Jones in the box seat, I think, because it feels a little bit like a fake search that they're putting on, and they're just going to end up with James Jones as the candidate. Because, as you said, you couldn't come up with two worse GM candidates, I don't think. I think, I looked at it. McHale was the Timberwolves GM from 95 to 08, Max, and had a decent record, 533 wins and 511 losses, but had 7 first-round exits with those Kevin Garnett teams.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of New Orleans with Anthony Davis.
Yes, very much so. And, I kind of felt, we saw his name around the coaching search as well. And, maybe I'm giving him too much credit here, but I kind of hope they're just mining him for information because, he's a big man. So anything to do with Ayton is great, that they can pick his brain on what, he would do and what he'd love as a player. And then I think something we've mentioned before with the coaching stuff is, he was the coach of the start of this Houston Rockets team with James Harden. So, any clues or information they can get around building Harden, in terms of Devin Booker, is great information to get too. What information they're getting out of Paxson, I've got no idea. Maybe how to draft number one, because he drafted LeBron James, Max, but he had a 185-307 record in Cleveland from 99 to 2005, Max. So I think he lives in Phoenix, which is about the only connection he should have with this GM search.
Yeah, but David, he's a consultant for the Chicago Bulls right now, who have been a complete and utter disaster for like 5 years. Why would you not want that on the team?
Exactly.
I feel like you might be right. They're just leaking out names to pretend they're having a search and they're going to, eventually appoint James Jones. But if they're going to do that, why not leak out some bigger names like Dave Griffin? You can leak out Barack Obama. Like, how about some big names? How about some good names that people get excited about? Not Kevin McHale.
Max McCauley, maybe?
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to be a fake GM search candidate. All right. I think that's all we got to do on that one.
Definitely.
David, how about some Did You Know?
Let's do it, Max. As you told me earlier this week, I'm not sure any Did You Know segment has quite been as obvious as this week's. With the Suns signing Jimmer Fredette for the remainder of the season, it was only fair that I dedicated Did You Know to the BYU star for this week's episode. But Max, given most of our listeners probably know all about Jimmer, and also given you saw this one coming, this week's Did You Know comes with a twist.
Ooh.
I like to test you a little bit for Did You Know?
Oh, God.
But this week we are turning the volume right up on that one, and the listeners too, with the ultimate Jimmer Fredette Suns quiz. In 7 seconds or less tradition, Max, I have 7 Jimmer-related questions for you covering his basketball career to date. Are you game?
I'm terrified, but yeah, let's do it.
All right, question 1. Who said this in March 2011? Jimmer is so ridiculous, he will absolutely play in the NBA. He has unlimited range.
I'm pretty sure that was at Maxim C11.
It sure was. I did a little Twitter search with your handle, and I came up with that beauty, Max. So a nice, easy one for you to start off there. But
yeah, it's always good to start off with embarrassing me before going on the next question. Yeah.
You weren't wrong. He did play in the NBA, and he does have unlimited range. So you were spot on.
It's true.
Question 2. Which name associated to the Suns right now does Jimmer have a brother of the same name? Is it Devin or TJ?
Ooh, I'm going to go with Devin.
It is TJ.
Damn it.
His brother is named TJ, and of course gives us our third TJ linked to the Suns, but hopefully we won't be mentioning his brother too much, so we won't get too mixed up there, Max. But on to question 3. Jimmer was, of course, drafted at number 10 in the 2011 draft. Not bad given Derek Williams, Jan Vesely, and Bismack Biyombo were all taken before him, Max.
Jesus.
But here are the names taken after him in that draft. Klay Thompson at 11, Kawhi Leonard at 15, Nikola Vucevic at 16, Iman Shumpert at 17, Tobias Harris at 19, Kenneth Faried at 22, Nikola Mirotic at 23, Reggie Jackson at 24, Jimmy Butler at 30, Bojan Bogdanovic at 31, Chandler Parsons at 38, and Etuan Moore at 55, Max. But now to the question. Which ex-Suns did I skip over at 13, 14, 40, and pick 60, Max.
Well, there's definitely a couple of Morris brothers there.
Correct. They're the 13 and 14.
What were the later ones, the pick numbers?
Pick 40, which I'd be very, very surprised if you got, and then the famous pick 60.
Oh, Isaiah Thomas, 60?
Correct.
And I don't know the 40, yeah. What's that?
John Lua.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Question 4. Phoenix brings Jimmer's NBA teams to 6. How many of Jimmer's other 5 other than Phoenix can you name, Max?
Well, he was drafted by Milwaukee.
Yep.
Did he play? He played for Sacramento, right?
Correct.
Oh, God. What else did he do? Did he ever play for Utah?
He did not, surprisingly.
Yeah, it seemed like that would have happened. Oh, man. I don't know. Well, who else?
He went to Chicago, then the Pelicans,
Okay.
then his home state, Knicks.
I almost said the Knicks, yeah. The other ones I had no idea.
Yeah, and as you said, he was drafted by Milwaukee. I didn't list the Spurs, but he was on there for a hot minute, but cut before he played any regular season action. Question 5, Max. Fredette, of course, scored 73 points in a single game in China, but take a stab at both his college career high and NBA career high, Max.
I'm going to say in college he probably got to like 38.
He had 52 against New Mexico.
Did he really?
He sure did.
That's insane in a college game. And then in the NBA, 28?
Ooh, a little less. He had 24 for the New York Knicks.
Okay.
Bit of a funny Arizona connection here, though, Max. His previous game records before both of those, he had 49 in college against Arizona, and he had 22 in the NBA against none other than the Phoenix Suns.
No, that's pretty funny. Real quick prediction. I think he'll set his NBA career high with the Suns.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. Question 6. Last year, Jimmer lost in the semi-finals of the $2 million basketball tournament. Which fan favorite son was on his team? Was it Jack Cooley or Lou Amundsen?
Oh, I love Lou. And I love Jack Cooley, too. I'm going to go with Lou because I just love him so much.
It was Cooley. You're getting these 50-50s wrong.
I'm doing really bad with these multiple choices.
I tricked you a little bit there. Lou was actually on the other team that beat him in the semi-finals, along with several other NBA guys. Jeremy Evans, Jerome Randall, Donald Sloan, Willie Reed, and James Michael McAdoo. So it basically took a whole roster of ex-NBA guys to take down Jack Cooley and Jimmer Fredette.
Wow.
Question 7, finally. Jimmer has worn 32 most of his pro career. How many ex-Suns can you name who wore number 32, Max?
Maury Stoudemire wore it for a while.
Correct.
Did Shaq wear it?
Correct.
I'm probably missing some obvious ones, but they're not coming to mind.
You're missing a few old guys that I never expected you to get. Probably only one more obvious one is Jason Kidd from 97 to 2011. The names after Shaq do not read very well. Taylor Griffin in 2010, Brandon Wright in 2015, and Devon Reed in 2018. But for our older listeners playing at home and thinking about it and maybe got a few of these right, we've got Nate Hawthorne in 75-76, Ira Terrell in 77, Charles Pittman 83 to 86, Mike Morrison in 1990, and Nigel Knight 91 to 94. I am not afraid to say I have not heard of any of those players, Max.
I was just going to say, David, you could have just made all those up and I wouldn't have said anything. I would not know.
Bonus quiz for you here in 7 seconds or less tradition. What number did Jimmer wear in Sacramento? Because Francisco Garcia had 32. It happens to also be retired in Phoenix due to a guy who has his own ties back to Sacramento, Max. There's a big clue for you.
Oh, Kevin Johnson, 7?
Correct.
There you go.
Now, finally, Max, it caught me a little off guard, but it isn't all that surprising that Jimmer is one of us. And I don't mean a Phoenix Sun. I mean a guy on the wrong side of 30.
I know.
And quite funnily, now the second oldest guy on the team behind only Jamal Crawford. With it being March Madness time, it got me wondering whether much of the Suns' young core would have even been paying attention to his record-breaking feats back in 2011, Max. Here are the ages of several Suns at that time in history. Booker and Bridges were 14, Jackson, Okobo, and Bender were 13, and DeAndre Ayton and DeAnthony Melton were 12.
Wow, that's crazy.
As for Jamal Crawford, though, Max, he was the same age that Fredette is right now, 30 years old, and playing his 11th season in the NBA with Atlanta. Quite funny that these two are now the two oldest vets on the current Phoenix Suns, and Fredette may take Crawford's minutes, as we mentioned earlier in the episode. That's it for this week, and looking forward to jumping into some first-round playoff stuff and other potential new Suns, as you mentioned, that we can watch out for in the playoffs when the Suns are all done and dusted, Max.
You really outdid yourself on that one, David. That was a lot of fun. I think the listeners are going to like that one a lot. That was cool.
Hopefully so.
Okay, so as I said at the top of the show, we're going to do kind of a fun thing here, at least in our minds. We're going to, first of all, give our playoff matchups we most want to see in the first round. I'm going to give out the West matchups, and David's going to have the East matchups. Mm-hmm. And then while we're giving these out, the other person's going to take the players from the teams in that matchup and say which ones could possibly be fits for the Suns in free agency or via trade next season.
Yep. Spot on, Max.
So hopefully that made sense. It'll make sense as we're going through it. David, how about you start with your least interesting first round East matchup that still is like one of your favorite matchups?
I really tried to get 4 matchups here that, had some backstory and some storylines in there, but it was really hard with this one, Max. The funny thing of both the East and the West is the 8s are pretty much locked in. There's an 8th race in the East. I decided to go with Miami. I would have loved to have thrown Charlotte in there to mention Kemba Walker, Max, but I just think Miami are looking kind of 3 games clear of them right now, and if anyone's going to challenge them, it'll be Orlando. So my least interesting matchup is Milwaukee at number 1 versus Miami at 8, Max.
That would have my call too. Just the very fact Miami's in it makes it uninteresting.
Yeah.
But Milwaukee's fun, and let's start with them in terms of the free agents. So I went through Milwaukee's roster. Mm-hmm. We're not going to mention the obvious guys. Everyone knows Giannis is not going to be on the Suns next year, so we're just
Yes.
ignore stuff like that. So we're only going to focus on the guys who there's a possibility. So I'm going to start with the guys who there's really not that great. I'm just going to rattle the names off. You tell me if any of these guys you think there's really a chance.
Okay.
Sterling Brown, Pau Gasol, Chris Middleton, Donte DiVincenzo, DJ Wilson, Tony Snell. Any of those guys?
Maybe an outside chance at Chris Middleton, but I would very much doubt that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I think we'd want him, but it seems like the way they've structured things, they're planning on bringing him back on a very large deal.
Yep.
So here are my guys who I think are actually possible. So first, George Hill.
Yes, someone that we've discussed earlier in the year, and I think a common theme throughout this whole section of this episode is we need to be really realistic about the kind of guy that Phoenix are going to be able to attract, and George Hill certainly fits a need, Max.
Yeah, he does. He's the problem with him is he's always hurt, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have to hope for a nice healthy season for him, but he's going to be pretty cheap probably. Mm-hmm. I would guess. I mean, I don't think he's going to have a whole lot of interest, so maybe somebody to go next to Booker theoretically makes sense.
You know where he really makes sense, Max, and this is a discussion that's going on Suns Twitter all the time at the moment. If you did draft a guy like Ja Morant, I would hope that it's not to start him straight away, and a guy like George Hill makes a shitload of sense when you look at a situation like that.
Yep, that does make a lot of sense. That'd be the exact role that you'd want him in. Next guy, how about Pat Connaughton? What do you think about him?
I like Pat Connaughton. He's having kind of a sneaky underrated season with the Bucks, and a good shooter and very underrated defensively, I think. He kind of gives Booker some problems sometimes. He's got that white guy reputation of being a bad defender when he definitely is not.
Yeah, I like him as a spark plug on the bench, exactly. The Suns need shooting desperately, and he's good at that, so I think it makes some sense there. Mm-hmm. Ersan Ilyasova, I'll point out, has $7 million next season, and then he's totally non-guaranteed, or mostly non-guaranteed the year after that.
Yep.
Not a bad fit next to Ayton, maybe?
Yeah, I really dislike Ersan as an overall player. I've just never loved him, but the fit there is definitely something you'd be looking for at power forward for sure.
And I think you'd rather have Nikola Mirotic, who we won't have to expand too much on because we talk about him like every single podcast.
Yes.
But I think the reason why Ilyasova would be gettable is because the Bucks would probably rather commit to Mirotic.
Yes.
And so maybe that's what happens, but obviously you'd rather sign Mirotic outright if for some reason he doesn't go back there.
Yeah, of course. If you're choosing between both of those guys' backs against the wall, you're definitely going with Mirotic. But yeah, Ilyasova's a nice shout. Obviously, there'd have to be a trade or something there, but it's good to mention some of these guys that you can trade for rather than just totally free agents, because we just keep mentioning the same names over and over if we do that, Max.
That's somebody maybe you trade TJ Warren for because the contract's way shorter.
Yes, I like that.
And you could see Milwaukee really wanting TJ Warren for scoring punch. So that could make some sense in some sort of formulation of that.
Yeah, I think Milwaukee's one of these teams. I was alluding to it earlier. I expect them to be fine in the playoffs, but maybe along with Utah and a couple of other teams, if things go really badly in the playoffs and they decide they need more scoring, that's where a guy like TJ Warren may actually have some value on the trade market for a couple of these teams that just need a scoring punch off the bench.
Yep, totally agree. All right, let's go through Miami really quick. This one's going to be a lot shorter because this roster's a freaking wasteland. The guys who I think aren't real, but I'll mention real quick. Deion Waiters, Derek Jones Jr. I just don't see Derek Jones coming back here, and Deion Waiters, ugh. Guys who I think are actual legitimate possibilities. Goran Dragic, maybe?
Yeah, I'm kind of sneaky on the radar with him, very much like Ricky Rubio. They're not amazing options, but just their ties to Igor and being able to just come in and run an offense. Again, when you're talking about a guy like Ja Morant, these guys, Rubio and Goran in particular, has 1 year left on his deal, I believe, whereas Rubio you'd be signing...
It's a player option, which he'll probably exercise.
Yeah, whereas Rubio you'd be signing outright. But again, if it's just a guy to come in and play a role, has ties to Igor, definitely wouldn't rule it out.
Nope. And only other guy, because like I said, this roster's got nothing, is Kelly Olynyk. His contract's not terrible, and there's some ways he makes sense next season.
Yeah, a guy I've mentioned before, and probably another common theme that's going to come up is adding a power forward that may not be your long-term solution at power forward or even the type of guy that you want to play next to Ayton long-term. We've had some pretty lengthy chats about how you should be optimizing Ayton at his peak, but I think the Bender experiment has shown us at least the type of power forward that should be playing next to Ayton more shorter term, and I do think Olynyk kind of fits that bill and can play some backup five as well.
Yep, that's my thinking too. I think it makes some sense. All right, I'm going to go to my least interesting West matchup.
Okay.
To me, the thing is, it's the West, so they're all sort of interesting.
Yep.
But for me, it's Utah and San Antonio. Not really for any fault of their own. Kind of San Antonio I'm just bored of.
Yep.
But it's just because the other matchups I'll get to are just way better, so I kind of had to kick these guys to the side just to have them away.
Yep.
So let's start going through those rosters. You can choose whichever one first.
I'll start with the Spurs, and I'll just throw two names at you. One that I don't love, but I'm just suspicious of. Rudy Gay is an unrestricted free agent.
So that's like the problem is he's a wing, right? And so it really they'd have to move a lot of players for that to make any sense.
Yeah, I just think the Spurs have been playing him a lot at power forward, and his percentages are really good. I think he's having the most efficient season of his career in terms of his overall field goal and 3-point shot. And there's a few guys on my list that are kind of wings, but pseudo power forwards that I think would fit the role of the power forward a little better than even a guy like Kelly Oubre, a bit more willing to bang with some of the bigger guys and stuff. So he's just a name that I don't overly love, but again, being realistic about who might be available to the Suns, that's a name. And another guy...
Yeah, I like that one. Well, real quick, though, do you know how old he is? I slipped my mind.
He's 32. I do have that down as a bit of a...
little old.
Yeah.
Be a 1 year thing, probably.
Yep. And then another guy who I wouldn't say is realistic, but just going through the rosters, it totally slipped my mind that he's on this team, and that's DeJounte Murray.
Oh yeah, so I think they seem to really love him.
Yeah.
But if for whatever reason he was available, yeah, I'd be all on that. Yeah,
they've got a bit of a roster kind of juggle, and I mean, having too much talent's not a bad thing, but Derek White has kind of come into his own this season, and how they play that backcourt in the future, I'm unsure. But just wanted to mention DeJounte because we've had a lot of discussions about the ultimate guy next to Devin Booker and what that looks like, and his defense and length and not over usage at the point guard position is exactly the kind of guy that you would love next to Devin Booker, or I would anyway.
He's a definite candidate to be on all defensive teams very soon. In fact, I think Nerd Twitter was already putting him on it last season. They think his impact is there.
And Utah, this matchup might be your least favorite, but Utah's probably my favorite team, and a lot of it is down to Igor's link to them, but there's just some players on the team that I really love from a Phoenix perspective as well. I'll throw a random one out first before the obvious one. So Jay Crowder, I think he's in that Ersan Ilyasova range of around $7 million. And as I mentioned before, Utah, depending on how things go in the playoffs, they could really decide that, they have too many role players on the team and not enough offense, and may be interested in a guy like TJ Warren. And I'd definitely take Jay Crowder back. How about you?
Yeah, that's a great call. I'd much rather have Jay Crowder than TJ Warren just because of the things the Suns need and also the contract length, and I could see Utah feeling the opposite way. So that's a nice one.
Yep. Derek Favors has a non-guaranteed $17 million. I think $1 or $2 million of that is guaranteed for him. They could pick that up and then look to do a trade again with TJ Warren and maybe some dead salary around the draft max. And again, he's not my favorite kind of archetype next to Ayton longer term, but what we've seen with Bender to finish the season here has really shown me, you need another true big next to him. Favors has been trying to extend out to the 3-point line, shooting a little bit from the corners and stuff, and as we've seen with Bender, he hasn't been shooting well at all. So I would look at a guy like Derek Favors, who's still only 28 as well, Max.
I love Derek Favors as an option for this team now. I didn't feel that way before for whatever reason, but he's also, first of all, he's had a really good season.
Yep.
He's been awesome. And also, I think if the Suns, if they're confident that Ayton can stretch out next season, shoot the three, then I think that fit is just really nice. Also, if Ayton's still going to do the thing where he can't play, it's 9 straight minutes a lot of the time in quarters.
Yep.
It makes a lot of sense to take him out and leave Favors in and go kind of small with him as your big. So, yeah, I think it's a really nice marriage, actually.
Yeah, and I think, my note kind of touches on here. My last note with Favors is you would be able to kind of walk away from a guy like Rashawn Holmes in a situation like that if he's got other offers elsewhere because, Favors essentially becomes your backup 5 as well, which is one reason why I absolutely love Derek Favors. It has worked for Utah in the regular season, but they've kind of hit roadblocks in the playoffs a couple of times with trying to play those two bigs. So that's a really interesting kind of why I'll be watching a series like this, Max, is if it doesn't work again with Gobert and Favors, I think that they'll finally pull the trigger on offloading him somewhere and trying to build properly around, I guess, Mitchell and Gobert.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense from both ways because I can see Utah moving on from him and Phoenix being interested. That's a nice one.
Yep, and the last guy sits in that Mirotic camp of being Ricky Rubio, someone we've talked about quite a lot on this podcast. I'm cooling a little bit on him is probably the only thing I would say for Ricky Rubio, but people who listen to this podcast have heard us talk about Rubio quite a lot, and I'm sure we will again in some off-season stuff.
Yeah, he hasn't played incredibly well this season, but he does seem extremely available.
Yeah.
So
yes.
That's one thing about him.
Yep.
All right, what is your second least exciting East matchup, Dave?
My number 3 here, Max, is Boston and Indiana flipping. Boston winning home court, getting the 4 seed, and Indiana being the 5 seed. In relation to that, Max, I'll say they're 1-1 against each other at the moment, but still have 2 games to go. So that's going to be really interesting because they're going to be foxing against each other a little bit, I think, because they'll be seeing the writing on the wall with a possible first-round matchup. But, the results of those games might actually swing home court as well. So they're kind of going to have to go all out in those last 2 games. And Indiana with Oladipo would have been awesome to watch this series, but still the Pacers just are a team that don't quit, and probably my favorite matchup in this one would be Miles Turner versus Al Horford.
Yeah, I agree. And also, man, Boston's sort of a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
That team could just explode chemistry-wise. I could absolutely see Indiana winning that series. I'll start with Indiana on this one because I actually found them surprisingly fascinating.
Alrighty, let's do it.
Well, I'll start with the 2 guys we've talked about a decent amount, the 2 point guards, both coming off the books. Corey Joseph, Darren Collison.
Yep.
One of those guys makes some sense, especially Darren Collison. He'd obviously just be a giant upgrade for the Suns at point guard.
Yep.
Little older, but that's kind of what they need there, setting presence. What do you think about those 2 guys?
Yeah, I think, again, looking at realistic targets, are 2 guys that we definitely have to look at. I probably like Collison more than Joseph in terms of a short-term option. I just think he's really reliable, and I haven't seen a hell of a lot of Indiana this season, but Collison's always played that kind of pseudo point guard role pretty well and isn't a big personality or someone that takes a lot of the ball and pretty good defender. So, yeah, I'd probably lean Collison between the 2.
Here's one that kind of jumped out at me as somebody I'd never thought about for the Suns before. And maybe he's not gettable because he's had another one of those guys who had a sneaky great season, and that's Bojan Bogdanovic.
Yes, I think we brought him up somewhere in one of a recent episode talking about.
Oh, did we?
Maybe I did in my own mind, Max. But yeah, I think he's a sneaky, underrated guy and has been great on Indiana. And you can't have enough shooters in the NBA. And I think that's still something the Suns are slowly learning. And he's probably on the wrong side of 30 or approaching it without knowing off the top of my head. So the contract, hopefully what I'm getting at there is the contract shouldn't be too ridiculous. But yeah, I love him as a player, and he'd take a lot of pressure off Booker and willing to take the big shot and can kind of create for himself too.
Yeah, he can do a lot of things. He's also not the worst defender in the world. He got this weird reputation for being a LeBron stopper, which he wasn't.
Yeah.
But he's not a bad defender. And while you were speaking, I look at his age. He'll be 30 next season.
Yeah, okay, so, there we go.
Doable, but not the best.
Looks a little bit older than what he actually is.
Yeah, the hairlines can be tough. Another one, Thad Young.
Yes.
Makes some sense.
Yep.
He's a banger next to Ayton. He's a little older also, but really just a really solid player.
Yeah. Yeah, he's again, we're not throwing out the massive names here, and some listeners might be disappointed in that, but we've got to be realistic here. And I've seen quite a few people bring up Thad Young, and I think he's a great name in terms of ticking a lot of the boxes of what you want next to DeAndre Ayton.
So do I. I'm just going to mention two more names so I could see be on the team next year who I'm not excited about, but Kyle Quinn and Wes Matthews, it wouldn't shock me. They kind of make some sense.
Yep, that's all that needs to be said on those.
Yep. Okay, let's go to Boston. I'm gonna start with a bomb. I wouldn't be shocked if Boston wants something to do with Hayward going forward.
Yes.
Depending what they're trying to do.
Yep.
And I could also see the Suns being desperate enough for like a big name to trade a lot for Gordon Hayward.
So what you're saying is our backcourt next year will be Jimmer Fredette, Devin Booker, and Gordon Hayward?
We're just gonna be the favorite team of Utah, man. They're going to like that. The Utah fans are going to defect to us from the Jazz.
Oh, wow. That would be a massive turn in events.
Yeah. So I don't think it's going to happen or anything, but it's possible. Here's the guys who I think are a little more realistic. I mean, we don't have to talk about him, David, but Terry Rozier. Yeah, okay. Terry Rozier. There's a lot of links there. We know that the Suns have liked him in the past. Whatever. Hope that doesn't happen.
I'll make one note on Terry Rozier. We see a lot of negativity towards him. I'm definitely someone who has been very negative towards him. But I guess with seeing the potential writing on the wall, I would just say as someone who has probably spent all season talking about continuity and situation and things like that, is if the Suns do end up signing Terry Rozier, particularly with the guys that they've targeted recently all working out on the team, I would be negative towards the signing depending on how much the money value is, but I will embrace Rozier and give him an opportunity because he has shown flashes of being a very good NBA player, and I can't continue to preach opportunity and fit and continuity with everything that we talk about on this pod and then not give Rozier a break if he ends up being a Phoenix Sun and seeing whether the opportunity and the different system and environment may change the course of events for Terry.
Yeah, so before this season started, I said I was going to give Jamal Crawford a chance, and it lasted about a quarter. So that's about how long it'll last for Terry with me. I'm less patient than you are, David. Aaron Baines is my other name. We talked about him last offseason. He's like a player option. He might exercise, but I do like him as a backup-ish five, maybe even playing next to Ayton sometimes.
I love Aaron Baines. He's
yeah, I know you do.
a token Aussie. Was actually born in New Zealand for anyone listening that didn't know that, but we stole him on our national team. But yeah, how's that for a frontline? Steven Adams and Aaron Baines for the New Zealand national team, Max.
That's not bad, man.
But yeah, I think that's a good shout. And just touching on your Hayward point, worth bringing up, maybe not to do with Phoenix, but yeah, I think he's not long for Boston. I think that's a great call.
Yeah, me neither. And then I'm just going to mention this guy. I have him in the surefire no category, but I've seen Suns fans hope for it. Kyrie Irving's not coming to Phoenix, guys. Just forget about that.
Nope.
Forget about that. All right, David, I'm going to give you my third West matchup.
Do it.
This one is, I think this is a fun basketball matchup. It's Portland versus Denver.
Ooh.
And there's also the Nurkic storyline, which is kind of fun because the Denver had to move on from Nurkic, and that was sort of a sour relationship.
Yep.
But just on the court, I think the offense on both sides would just be really fun.
Yeah, I think that's a matchup that I'd really look forward to watching and going through this exercise, that when the Suns season is over, I'm going to really look forward to watching some of these playoff matchups, Max, and
yeah.
This will definitely be one of them. Let's get Denver out of the way because I find them less interesting than I do with the Portland Trail Blazers. Mm-hmm. Isaiah Thomas, obviously, struggling mightily, but could be a six-man option for the Suns and has been here before. He's an unrestricted free agent. Be interesting to see how his playoff do go and whether he even plays at all. Paul Millsap has a team option. If Denver go big, kind of trying to sign a big fish, I think what we've seen with him next to Jokic, and he's been linked before to the Suns, he'd be an interesting power forward move for the Suns next to Ayton, Max.
Yeah, I really like Paul Millsap as his name. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense to me if they can get him on a short deal. And I think there is a decent chance Denver doesn't bring him back because it's a large old option they got on him.
And one guy who's had a pretty bad season and probably won't feature in the playoffs, so I won't be watching for him, but kind of what happens might affect his restricted free agency, Max, and that is Trey Lyles.
I like it from the shooting standpoint, and I think he hasn't had a good season, but last season he had a good season, right?
Yeah, last season he was really good and has kind of fallen off a cliff and a bit of a logjam for the Nuggets, and he's kind of just fallen out of the rotation. But if you're basing
and there's also the obvious Booker Lyles Kentucky connection, play the same team.
Exactly. So that's a name, but I'll throw over to Portland because I find them much more interesting.
Okay.
Seth Curry's a name that you had last offseason. I think he'd be a cheap guy that you could bring in as an unrestricted free agent to Phoenix. Jake Layman is a restricted free agent. As a general rule, probably stay away from restricted free agents for the most part, but he's an interesting name. Probably the most interesting name, though, is Aminu, who's an unrestricted free agent, and he's 29 next year, so fits into that kind of little bracket, Max.
Yeah, I actually thought he was a little older. That makes him more intriguing. Al-Farouq Aminu is a good player.
Yep.
And he also is a player who is a legitimate power forward. He can actually play that position.
Yeah, he's that archetype of, you'd call him a wing, but he's very much willing to play power forward and pretty much does exclusively for the Trailblazers.
He's a big wing, I like to call it. And then you mentioned Jake Layman. I actually think that's a pretty good fit, too. He's been kind of their offense in certain games this season, though, so I kind of feel like they're probably going to bring him back.
Yeah, just shooting is what this team needs. And probably my biggest storyline, much like with your Hayward one, I don't think it becomes a story for the Suns, but with this CJ McCollum injury, maybe Portland are in a situation where they finally decide to split CJ and Dame, and I think Dame is probably a Trailblazer for life, at least not for the next little while, whereas the rumors last year were maybe he was gettable. But I think CJ maybe doesn't come back from injury, maybe Portland do quite well and a couple of other guys step up and they decide to offload CJ, Max.
Yeah, I'll be surprised if CJ's on the Trailblazers of the year, to be honest with you. I think he's going to be traded.
Yep.
The Suns would be dumb to do it, but it wouldn't shock me because they do dumb things.
Yep.
It's just, it doesn't make sense with Booker to me, but it wouldn't shock me, so it's definitely worth bringing up.
Yep, I agree. So my number 2 matchup, I think now, Max.
Yep.
All right, so I really wanted to get a Philly-Boston first round, but if you just look at the standings, it's just pretty much impossible to happen right now. So here's what I came up with. I came up with Philly at number 3 versus Brooklyn at number 6, Max.
Yeah, that would be really fun because you could totally see Brooklyn getting up in that series and Philly going into panic mode.
Yeah, I looked at the games for all of these series kind of during the regular season. Philly are up 2-1 with 1 to play at the moment, but they've all been really high-scoring affairs. I think would be a really fun first-round matchup to watch, but Brooklyn could potentially go after one of Jimmy Butler or Tobias Harris, so that's a nice little storyline in that playoff series, and probably, D'Angelo Russell versus whoever they decide to try and put on him to stop him would be really interesting as well, with that interesting starting 5 for the Philadelphia 76ers, Max. So
yeah, it'd probably be Jimmy Butler, right?
Yeah, probably. They've got JJ Redick and as the kind of weak link, but they can probably throw any of Butler and Simmons and maybe even Harris at Russell at times. But what have you got in terms of players from that series, Max?
I'll start with Brooklyn. I want to real quickly, we don't have to go into this deeply. D'Angelo Russell, obviously, early on before he had this breakout season, I was all on him.
Yep.
And I think that everyone now would be, not everyone, but a lot of people would be very interested in him being a Sun. I think you and I both made this point many times. It's only going to happen now if Brooklyn wins big in free agency.
Yes, you want Russell to be an unrestricted free agent, just the way that it works. Brooklyn are probably going to match anything, as you said, with how well he's played this season, but Phoenix would have to make a number of moves just to sign him to an offer sheet, and then if that gets matched, you've kind of cut or waived or stretched a bunch of guys, made some trades, kind of end up in that LaMarcus Aldridge type territory, but even worse. And I just can't see the Suns doing it as stupid as they have been in the past with some of these moves. They've been a little more shrewd recently. So, yeah, I think you want Brooklyn to hit on a couple of big free agents, maybe a Butler or Harris, as I mentioned, and have to renounce Russell's cap hold.
Yep.
And then it becomes an interesting conversation, but only then, Max.
Next one, I think everyone gave up on this guy when he signed an extension, but I still think if Brooklyn gets big winnings, say they sign Kyrie, for example, and Kevin Durant, they really win big.
Yep.
Spencer Dinwiddie all of a sudden is more expendable and maybe gettable for the right deal.
That's a really interesting one. As I was going through this, the high-scoring games, as I mentioned, it was basically either Russell or Dinwiddie that kept Brooklyn in the games against Philly, both scoring over 30 points. And good point by you, just because guys sign contracts, it doesn't mean that they're not gettable in the future. And we'll continue to bring up non-free agents in this section because, as I said, you just end up talking about the same names over and over again if you just go with the free agents, Max.
Yep. I'll go to the guys who are more realistic, but I think less interesting. And we can talk about them together because they're kind of a similar role they would play for the Suns. Sort of that big wing role. Ed Davis is kind of even like a real big.
Yep.
And then DeMarre Carroll is the big wing kind of guy.
He fits that kind of Jay Crowder archetype that I brought up before. And yeah, I think he's on the last year of a deal, or is he a free agent?
He is a free agent, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so he's an interesting one. He's been decent in Brooklyn this year and had health concerns in the past, but yeah, I've always been a big fan of DeMarre Carroll. He would fit really well with the way that Igor likes to play too.
Yeah, weird career for him. I don't want to go too far into it because we're running out of time here, but DeMarre Carroll was insanely good in Atlanta, went to Toronto and was pretty bad, and then it's sort of resurged, so it's kind of hard to know what you're getting with him.
Yes, very much so.
All right, Philadelphia. First two guys I just want to do together because they're kind of, the big fish. Butler and Harris. I don't think Jimmy Butler is realistic at all, but I want to mention because I think Suns fans will think about him. I don't see him wanting to be here. Tobias Harris. Normally I'd say the same thing, but there's been some weird smoke with a Gambo and stuff about him, so I don't know. What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, we've seen Harris mentioned a lot, so maybe in terms of max money guys, which we would have to make some moves to free up, but we do see Tobias Harris's name linked a lot to the Phoenix Suns, and as you said, where there's smoke, there's often fire, so I seem to find a hard situation why Harris would choose to come to the Phoenix Suns, particularly because he should have other offers for the same money, but maybe if those offers aren't quite forthcoming and the Suns were willing to give him the full max, that might be a way that you see Harris in the desert.
Yeah, I guess it's not impossible. And here's the thing, though. Like you said, you have to create max space. I think Oubre's gone if you do that. You have to.
100%.
Listen, that's worth it because Tobias Harris is, near star level player, so you do it.
Yep.
Three guys from Philly. We'll go through quickly. Mike Scott, I think, makes some sense.
Yep.
For people who don't know who he is, he's like a stretch power forward guy. Makes sense to Ayton. Other guys, TJ McConnell, Arizona connection, need a point guard. That's pretty obvious. And then JJ Redick was tied to the Suns before. Would love to bring him in. Great character guy, great shooter, obviously. Makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah, both of those guys tick boxes there and have links back to the Suns or Arizona, and that stuff with Redick in the offseason was kind of weird, and it'd be interesting whether we see something like that again, or whether he thinks about coming to the Suns this offseason, because he's signed a pair of one-year deals now. Now's probably the time where he'd be looking to sign something a little bit more secure for his career, because again, another guy like us on the wrong side of 30, Max.
Yep, it'd be like a finish out your career, sail to the sunset sort of contract.
Yeah.
All right, my second favorite West matchup is the Rockets versus the Clippers. Storylines write themselves. Beverly going crazy against his old team. Chris Paul against his old team. There might be fights on the court. It would be something.
Yep. I've got that as probably one of my most fun matchups to watch, and it's great that the West is shaking out that way, that we're going to see one of those. And I've really only got one name for the Rockets. If you look at their kind of cap sheet, guys are either there long-term or end-of-the-bench guys that don't really fit with the Suns. But a guy that's been on the Suns before, Daniel House.
I liked him a lot, even when he was on the Suns. Remember that game against Golden State? He had he's a nice-sized wing who has some talent. I don't really understand why the Suns gave up on him, and I think Houston has used him well.
Yeah, he's a restricted free agent. Weird situation with his contract. I posted that video of the Rockets broadcast team talking about him and the owner's relationship after the Suns game that we saw, actually. But, he's short sample size so far with him being back with the Rockets, but on the overall season, he's shooting 41% on 4.5 threes, perfect fit in that Harden-led offense, and therefore would be a pretty good guy to bring in on the Suns as well, Max. And, I'm predicting he's going to have a big playoffs. I think teams will scheme, obviously, for James Harden, and guys like PJ Tucker and House and Capella are going to have to step up and try and score a lot of the points. And I just think House is going to be one of those guys that makes some big shots in some big games, Max.
Yep. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Clippers, Patrick Beverley, we've talked about quite a lot. He's 31 next season and would be a great stopgap guy. Again, if you draft a point guard, Pat Bev can probably start and be a great mentor for a point guard in the NBA.
As we mentioned, I think previously, he's been an excellent mentor by all reports for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yes, very much so. And two guys that came over to the Clippers at the trade deadline and are both unrestricted free agents. JaMychal Green, we've spoken about before, would be a pretty decent power forward fit on this team. And a guy who I just think is a real ultimate Igor-style player, and that's Garrett Temple.
Ooh, yeah, I like Garrett Temple. He's underrated. He's a pretty good player, and I could see him being a nice upgrade for us as a bench scorer kind of guy.
Can handle a bit, pretty good distributor, always has decent assist numbers, and can score a little bit too, as you said, and a bit of a knockdown deep threat. One of those guys who, his overall percentages aren't amazing, but, maybe every time he plays the Suns, he seems to light it up from three. So I've always liked Garrett Temple, and as I said, I just see him as a real Igor-style player, Max.
Yeah, he's one of those jack-of-all-trade guys who's, not very good at anything and isn't, athletic overpowering, so you kind of forget about him, but he is, a solid NBA player in, every way.
Which is exactly the kind of guys that Phoenix should be trying to bring in.
Yes. They need a lot more of those guys because they have a lot of guys who are not solid NBA players in a lot of ways.
All right, we're up to my top billing in the East, I think, Max.
Yeah, let's hear it.
This one's awesome. Toronto 2, Detroit 7. And it's awesome for quite a few reasons. Detroit are 3-0 on the season against Toronto, Max.
Wow, I did not realize that.
I think Ibaka missed one, Lowry missed one, and Kawhi missed one, but still, mentally, that is very, very good. Toronto's playoff record overall obviously makes this series or any first round series that Toronto are in really interesting for this upcoming playoff run, but also the link to Dwayne Casey, who's now the head coach of Detroit, going up against his old team, obviously 3-0 because he knows how to scheme for Toronto perhaps, and pressure would really be on Kawhi and Toronto in a first round matchup. And favorite matchup here, Blake versus Siakam, would be awesome to watch.
Yeah, that would be really good. And another reason why I like this pick by you is, listen, the Bill Simmons theory from a long time ago, it's if you have the best player in the series, you can win the series. And Blake Griffin could be the best player in this series if he gets onto a good roll. He's really good.
Yes. He's been on a bit of a downward trend lately. I only know this because he has completely tanked my fantasy team at the pointy end of the season. But that's the kind of matchup, other than Siakam, you've kind of got that weird Gasol-Ibaka thing and what they do with them. And yeah, Blake could cause all kinds of problems if Pascal can't handle him.
Speaking of Mr. Blake Griffin, let's get to Detroit.
Okay.
I don't think it's likely in any sense, but if Detroit flames out, there's some problems there. They decide they don't want to pay the massive contract that Blake is currently being paid. Is it impossible that the Phoenix Suns, who have been linked to Blake before, are the ones who step up to bring him on? He's, as you said, been linked before, and there's a gaping hole at power forward, Max. So that's a very, very interesting one. Ones who are probably less interesting, Zaza Pachulia.
Ugh.
I have to mention as sort of backup just because I think he's a free agent, maybe a backup center.
Igor connection too.
Igor connection. And then two guys who I think one may be more likely than the other, but both possible: Reggie Jackson and Ish Smith.
Ooh. Every time I watch Ish Smith play, I think how fun it would be if he was our backup point guard. But Reggie Jackson, what are you thinking there?
I'm thinking there that Detroit probably hates him because he's bad. I'm thinking that the Suns are effing desperate for point guards.
Yep.
And I'm thinking he only has 1 year left on his deal. Those are all the things that I'm thinking.
The type of situation that might play out where, they don't get guys that they want and they've got to look to trades. I've said very consistently that I see Phoenix making quite a lot of trade movement this offseason. So, that would be a stopgap, again, type option. And Reggie's been kind of good. It'll be interesting to see how he goes.
But I haven't really followed his stats very closely, but that's interesting.
Yeah, he's been really good in that little resurgence that Detroit have had, and still has some frustrating games, obviously. But him and Drummond have kind of seemed to have worked it out a little bit, and Blake's stats have kind of taken a bit of a backseat as a result. But yeah, it will be interesting to see them in the playoffs. I'm kind of really glad they've made it, because it'll be a good team to watch, I think, to see if it all capitulates or whether they can rise to the occasion a little bit.
Yeah, they kind of feel like a better playoff team than a regular season team to me for some reason. I can see them really being hard to play against when Drummond and you have Drummond and Blake coming at you every single night for a series. That's kind of a lot.
Yeah.
Toronto. So here are my two names here. These are. I'm glad we saved these for last, because these are like kind of going to be startling names.
Yep.
Kyle Lowry. If Kawhi leaves and this team goes full rebuild, I could really see them trading Lowry. And the Phoenix Suns, I mean, if he has even like anything close to what he was like in his prime, he would be a wonderful fit next to Devin Booker.
Oh, like amazing. And I think, as you say, if Kawhi leaves, I mean, probably no matter how Toronto go in the playoffs, if Kawhi leaves, they're pretty much destined to go that rebuild. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting. I think that's where a guy like Tyler Johnson's contract really comes into play.
Yep.
And you kind of throw a bunch of other stuff at Toronto and get Lowry across, because, that would be a pretty awesome backcourt pairing with Devin Booker. Lowry, again, wrong side of 30, if I'm remembering correct, Max. But
definitely, yeah.
That's the kind of moves that the Suns are going to have to make, and we've got to be realistic about this.
Yep, and he only has 1 year left, so I don't think it would cost that much to get him. And also, if it's not working out, it's only 1 year. Other guy who is also another trade candidate who I think would be a surprising name for many to hear. It was surprising to me when I decided it's possible. Serge Ibaka, David.
Ooh, yeah, Serge has kind of been good. He had that brain snap against Marquise Chris.
Yeah.
Another older type guy, but the Suns should be looking to bring in older type guys and proper vets, because we've seen what fake vets in Tyler Johnson and Kelly Oubre were able to do for the team. So imagine some more guys that just know how to play and can run the system for Igor and just not make dumb, silly rookie mistakes on this team could mean the world. And Ibaka's that kind of guy in terms of his 3-point shot and weak side kind of rim protection, is that perfect fit next to DeAndre Ayton. There's not too many guys in the NBA, so you can't be too picky.
Yep, and if I actually believe that he was 29 as he's listed, I'd be much more interested. I don't believe it. All right, David, ready for the final one, my favorite West matchup?
I think I know what's coming, and I can't wait to watch this one.
Yeah, it's really not a surprise. It's OKC Golden State, guys. It's not hard.
Storylines galore.
Yep, it's the obvious one. David, what about the players and the teams?
I'll start with Golden State. We've obviously got to mention Kevin Durant, because everyone wants to still hold on to that hope that he's coming to the Valley.
Yeah.
All I'll say on him is Quinn Cook's also a restricted free agent, and there seems to be a lot of stories that wherever Kevin Durant go, Quinn Cook will go too.
All right.
We saw with their best friend getting shot and killed earlier this week.
I didn't see that. Yikes.
Yeah, very good friends themselves, and were friends of that gentleman who lost his life. But it seems that those two are tied together in free agency. Two other names I'll throw out very, very quickly because we're running out of time. Jonas Jerebko is an unrestricted free agent.
Yep, like it.
Another guy that fits the Igor kind of system, I think. But he's 33, Max, which really surprised me.
Oh, Jesus, really?
Yeah. So he'd be just a guy you'd probably bring in on a short-term deal. And a guy I've mentioned before, so I won't go on him too much, is Jordan Bell.
Oh, I mean, I love Jordan Bell. I think they'll probably try to keep him because he's probably the cheaper end, but I do love him.
So on to OKC. I'll start from the bottom. Patrick Patterson has a player option who's completely fallen off this season, but is only 31 years old and would be a decent stretch for next to Ayton.
Yeah, definitely. He has fallen off. Maybe you try to give him a small deal. Hope he resurges his career.
Markieff Morris is an unrestricted free agent. Be interesting to see what he does in free agency, but I don't think
probably not coming to the Suns.
Here's a big one for you, and a big playoffs for him, and I think I know the answer to this question, but would you rather Nerlens Noel or Rashawn Holmes, Max?
Nerlens Noel by a lot, yep.
Yeah, so he's got a player options. A big playoffs for him, particularly in a Golden State series, a big role to play, I think, so it'll be interesting to watch him and where he goes next year. My favourite here, and a guy who I believe is rumoured to maybe come back for the playoffs, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens here. That is Andre Robertson.
While you're talking, I thought about that. The problem, the Suns just are so desperately needing shooting that it's a tough fit, but the defenses obviously would be awesome. Him and Mikal out there would be silly.
Yep.
So I like it.
You know, OKC have had an amazing defense already this year without Andre, and maybe if they're in a playoff series, whether it is against the Warriors or someone else where they decide that they just didn't have quite enough offense, they already had a great defense without Roberson. They might decide to make a change, and TJ Warren off the bench for them as a scoring punch could be an option that they'd look at. And their money's quite similar. Warren's got more years, and I would love Robertson on this team.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Also, they wouldn't care about TJ Warren's years as much, you probably think, because they're capped out regardless.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I just want to quickly touch on your Noel point. I thought it was great. His player option is really small, so it'll probably just depend on how he plays in the playoffs, exactly like you said. And I can see him being like a breakout star of the playoffs and going somewhere, getting overpaid, and then not being as good.
Yep, he's prime for that, definitely.
Yep. All right, David, ready for 7 seconds or less?
Let's do it. 7
seconds or less is a statement where one of us asks the other 3 questions for which the other has 7 seconds or less to answer and has not prepared. David, it's my turn to ask you. Are you ready?
I am.
Which player that we've mentioned today's episode that you hadn't really thought about before is the most exciting to you for the Suns?
Ooh, I think I'm going to go with Goran, Max. It's probably not my favorite in terms of like fit and who I would definitely target, but just reading the tea leaves a little bit and where Miami are situated, I could really see that happening, Max.
Yeah, that's a good one. For me, mine would be Aminu. For you, I just never even connected those Aminu with the Suns before ever. Interesting.
Yeah, I really like his fit as a power forward. I think that's definitely one to watch.
Yep, me too. All right, we talked about first round matchups, David, but what matchup out of the entire playoffs, you can pick any round, do you most want to see?
That is a great question and something I mentioned earlier. I in the East, I definitely want to see a Philly-Boston matchup. I'm not sure with the way that the bracket's looking whether that can happen. My favorite matchup in the West is probably your Golden State OKC one, so I'm definitely going to be rooting for that one to happen. Outside of that, I kind of want to see Golden State and Houston go at it again in full health, Max. I know that's boring to some people, but I definitely want to still see that again.
It's not boring to me because I think Harden's even better than he was last year.
Yeah.
And I think he'd be a massive problem for them. Mine's probably Giannis versus Golden State. I want to see that.
I hope that's the finals we get.
Yeah, me too. You know, you kind of almost predicted my next question. At this point, David, out of all the teams that are going to make the playoffs, who do you want to win the title?
Who do I want to win the title? I kind of want Houston to win it.
Interesting.
I don't know. I'm a bit of a Houston fan. I just really like the way that they've built things over the years, and last year was obviously a bit of a shocker. So the narrative of them coming back and beating Golden State would be awesome to see, for me at least. I'm not sure how much people love them outside of that, but probably outside of that and the storylines that go with it, a team that I've written all year is I would love to see Toronto win the NBA Finals, Max.
Yeah, that'd be a fun story. I like when teams like that win, and that's why mine's OKC, because I like teams like that winning.
Yeah, I'll throw it back at you. What 2 questions. What's your most likely upset of these first rounds that we've gone over, and who would you choose as a non-Golden State winner for the finals?
My most likely upset, I touched on it earlier, I think Indiana could beat Boston.
Yep.
That's probably it for me. And then I think the non-Golden State winner, if I had to bet on it, would be... that's tough. I guess I would bet on Toronto.
Yep.
No, actually, you know what? I think it's Philly. I think Philly has a really high upside if they figure it out.
Ooh, yes. That's a good one. Yep, I like that one a lot.
Okay, that's it for us, David. Last week I said we'd read out some reviews. We don't have very much time, so we'll read about next week, if that's okay with everybody. 4
guys in the US all jumped on, and we're up to 65 stars, Max. So shout out to Andreas, DJB, Blakers1328, and I Hate Tay West, who all gave us very positive reviews. So thanks, guys.
And we'll read your reviews out next week along with anybody else who reviews. We'll put a whole segment aside for it. We'll read them all out. So
my apologies, but I've got a flight to catch, which is why we're finishing this one up, Max.
Yep, only reason why. Please rate, review, subscribe. It really helps us. David, thank you so much for joining us. This is fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Max, and I'm glad we could squeeze it in because we might miss next week with my travel. But I'm excited after this for, we're going to have plenty of draft, free agency, and trade episodes once the season's over. And I'll throw it over to you now, Max. You were very positive about our wins to end the season. How are you feeling now? How many wins might we get in these last 9 games?
Probably 9-0 because of Jimmer Fredette, I'd guess. No, not good. Probably 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think that's probably realistic now, and we'll be all hoping the season's over by the end of it. But as I said, lots of exciting stuff coming up, and we'll keep coming with episodes as we can.
It's going to be an interesting offseason. Thanks, guys.